We're located about 40 miles southeast of Portland in Clackamas County. When we moved here in about 1991, what was growing here was essentially what you see. I would call it second growth, at least second growth, because it was logged in the early 1930s. I love the forest. I've grown up in the forest and have come to love it, and so I wanted to be able to look out my windows and see a mature forest, and so that's what we have here.
We spend a lot of time hiking the forest and observing nature and seeing what ways that we can make improvements upon, for example, invasive species that we might be finding on our forest property. As we're enjoying it, we know some plants don't belong here and they can tend to take over from the native species. So we've done a lot of blackberry pulling, we've done a lot of reed canary grass removal. So that's one way that we've impacted improving upon the properties.
For this particular piece, it's more just for beauty, for wildlife, for recreation. Those were our prime goals, but we have other parcels just adjacent to us here that are more for forest management, timber production.
Our children really brought it up at the dinner table. What can we do as a family? We've had many dinner table discussions around that topic at that time when our children were in their early teen years about what can we do to provide a solution to climate change ourselves. And so at that time we discussed many different options as to how we could improve that situation on a small scale just ourselves. So we looked at, well, we've got a lot of trees, so we don't have the opportunity really to put solar panels on our roof, too much shade. But what we do have is an asset on our property is our stream running through all of our parcels. And so given that, we could conceive of, and we did at that time, decide that we could use our creek to be able to put a micro hydro facility on to be able to generate our own electricity.
So for our micro hydroelectric facility, I created what they call a run-of-the-river intake system. So it's just a concrete box, a small concrete box that our intake pipe or a penstock goes into, and the water just naturally flows into this box, and then we limit the flows to not into the box so that we don't impair the movement of fish in any way upstream to the more or the better spawning grounds, the better rearing grounds that they have up there. And so that was all done by us, and the cost of the materials was funded by the Energy Trust of Oregon, but it's a fairly robust system, so the total cost back in 2008 for all the materials was over $40,000. But that's not to say that somebody couldn't implement a much smaller system that would power a smaller home or a portion of the home, and you could do it much more simply and much more cheaply. And there are funders out there like the Energy Trust of Oregon that will pay for all or a good part of what these installations are.
Having put in our micro hydro and changing from oil to all electricity has really reduced our carbon footprint a tremendous amount. We felt like that was a very important step for us as a family to be able to make that kind of an impact. And then eventually we purchased an electric car, so those were other ways that we could utilize the electricity that we were producing and also reduce our carbon footprint.
In my opinion, climate smart forestry is doing all that you can to not only minimize your emissions in your everyday life, but also in your forestry operations, but also trying to optimize the sequestration and storage of the carbon that you have on your property. When I was a student at Oregon State in forestry, at that time, timber rotations were typically considered to be 60 to 80 years. And over time, those have dwindled down to the industrial forest land basis, probably between 38 and 42 years, something like that. I've never held to that. I've always wanted to have a longer rotation, and now that we're in this forest carbon program, that's essentially a prerequisite.
So we live here on about 25% of our acreage, and that's the acreage that we've deemed that we're not going to touch. We want to keep our trees growing as long as possible and storing more carbon over time. But the other 75 or so acres that we own, we do manage them actively for harvest. Our plan is to increase our rotation more so than is commonly done these days. We really prefer to keep our trees growing more on a 60 to 80 year rotation.
The bottom line is that we are striving towards a longer cycle between harvests so that we can sequester and store more carbon.
So we have more complex wildlife species that are inhabiting places that have these longer, older rotation of trees on them versus where the trees are younger and they don't support the pileated woodpecker, for example, that we're seeing on a lot of our older trees.
We've targeted fuels reduction in a number of ways. We do pre-commercial thinning ourselves. We do all the pruning ourselves. We've eliminated invasive plant species, not eliminated, but controlled them as much as we can. And so not only on our property, but I've written grants through the Department of Forestry for fuels reduction work on neighboring properties stretching over about 5 miles. And so that provides us essentially better insurance that our area, our community will be more fire safe because we've treated these properties that we triaged them. We essentially ranked them, or I did, which ones were the most serious in terms of overstocking, for example, or lack of pruning, or forest health reasons. There was a lot of dead trees that needed to be removed, these kinds of things. And so once we cataloged all those properties, all the landowners came up and once they saw the benefit that was happening to their property in terms of fuels reduction, our level of financial commitment from the other landowners jumped from about $17,000 to over $70,000. People started to put in more of their own money once the contractor was there. They realized they could see what was happening to their property, and they realized this makes a lot of sense because it's a whole lot cheaper to do this than to have your house burned down. Virtually everything we do, we try to use hand tools as much as we can. All the pruning we do is with hand saws, just Armstrong. We try to walk to various places that we need to instead of driving a vehicle if we can, unless we need to carry a chainsaw or something really heavy, But I would say those are the prime emissions reductions we do. Just part of our everyday lifestyle is to not automatically think about taking your truck or your car someplace or to use a gas-powered pruner or a gas-powered weed whacker. We'll just use a machete and a pole saw.
So choosing to use hand clippers, hand loppers, and pole saws that are not electrified is our way of not only not producing more carbon, it's also our way to be healthier ourselves.
Over the course of 21 years, we've been able to prune and maintain pre-commercially thin, mostly with hand tools, all of the trees that we need to take care of, so on 101 acres. When our kids were younger, that was their main source of employment, was we had them out there pruning. The only rule I gave them was I said, you can't have earbuds in your ears. You have to be out there listening to the sound of the forest. At that time, they kind of groused about that, but they look back at it and say that was probably one of the best things that we made them do. Store carbon, not fat, and if you have those earbuds in, you can't hear the forest.